First, I'd like to just say to the gentleman from Missouri that his idea of rotation is rather odd. The majority of the homeless population happens to be the disabled and elderly, and they need permanent housing. And so we can talk about how to get rid of homelessness all we want without spending any money, but it won't work. It's going to cost money. And we talk about fully funded. We're talking about trying to clean up the streets in this country. It is absolutely shameful and unconscionable that in almost every city we have people sleeping under bridges. And for veterans, there may be some good programs here and there, but it's not enough. And so with that, I'm going to yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Missouri who has offered this amendment so he can continue to try and explain why, in fact, you're talking about full funding and why you're talking about the private sector not being a panacea, that it requires government participation also. I yield to the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you. And I appreciate the comments from my colleague from Missouri. And he's probably the only one in here who is familiar with Saline County or Marshall, Missouri. I'm sure none of you have gone on vacation there, but oh, Mr. Clay, I didn't see him at the end. Mr. Clay from Missouri. But I was stunned when I met with the Economic Development group in Marshall when they told me that in this rural community, 80 miles from Kansas City, they have 1,700 homeless veterans. Not just, I mean, that doesn't include the people who are sleeping in the parks, but veterans. And one of the things that he has asked me to do, and that community has asked me to do, is try to figure out a way we can generate some housing for the homeless in this rural Missouri county. So I think the historic views we have of homelessness may not fit with what's going on in this contemporary society in the aftermath of a decade of war and the mental wounds that many of our veterans are carrying around. One of the other issues that I think would be helpful for us to consider is that the private market has not been eager to feel the need for rental units that are affordable. They you know, and maybe if I were a developer or a builder, I would go for a different market as well. Maybe I'd want to try to get maximum dollars. But as the government, the government, I mean, somebody needs to help those who are in trouble, and the private sector is not going to do it. They never have, never will. So what I would hope for is that we could consider fully funding, because the failure to fully fund is the failure to fully respond to a significant portion of the population. There are people who have not recovered from the recession of 2008. Just yesterday, I spoke with one of the members who represents a county that most of us would think to be a county of well-to-do people, and the number of foreclosures, the number of people who lost their homes in those areas is just almost unbelievable. So I think the fully funded language is an inseparable part of what my amendment seeks to do. However, I would love to work to address this problem maybe through some additional legislation that will come through the Housing Subcommittee. I yield back.
Would the ranking member yield to the chairman to ask a question to the gentleman from Missouri?
Yes.
Well, she had.
Oh.
Claiming my time, I'll yield to the chair.
So I just want to ensure, because when I hear this phrase "fully funded," what that typically means is to fund a program at the President's requested level. Is that the intention of the gentleman from Missouri?
Yes.
Okay. So regardless of what reforms may or may not happen within the legislative process, it is the gentleman's intention to fund the President's requested level, correct?
Correct.
I thank the gentleman for the clarification. Thank the Ranking Member for yielding. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentlelady from Utah seek recognition? You need to press the microphone button. Does the gentlelady move to strike the last word?
Strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say I appreciate this conversation, and I understand what we are all trying to do here in terms of trying to provide the need for the poor and the American people. There's an old saying in law that says that what was meant to be used as a shield shall not be used as a sword. Government is meant to protect life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And many times when we try to implement programs and try and shield the American people, those programs turn around and become a sword to the American people. Now, homelessness, like so many other problems, when controlled by a larger government and influenced by incentives, by the way, unfortunately ends up hurting those that it vows to protect, making problems worse, particularly government-subsidized housing for the poor. We spend about $1 trillion on poverty programs that's supposed to end poverty between federal government and state governments, yet we continue to grow the amount of people that we have living in poverty. If it's not working, we have to try something different. Now, I firmly believe that hard work, education, and thrift will take you far beyond what any government program can ever promise. I believe that we need to spend our time making sure that we're educating our children, working hard to really eliminate poverty from the ground up instead of working on symptoms of the problem. So I am happy to work with whoever would like to work on this issue, but I believe that throwing money at the problem isn't going to really help, because it has not helped. And we have to do what we can to make sure that we are creating a community of people who are dependent and financially secure. I yield the remainder of my time to the Chair.
I choose to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Well, she yielded back to the Chair. Okay. I'll yield the gentlelady's time back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Texas seek recognition.
And I yield to the...
Move to strike the last word.
I do, sir.
Okay.
And I yield to Mr. Cleaver.
Gentleman from Missouri now is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Green, Mr. Chairman. In a friendly response, my family didn't live in a house with running water or electricity until I was 7, almost 8. We moved into public housing. I have 3 sisters, mother and father. My father worked 3 jobs, maitre d' at the Wichita Club, cleaned up the T.A. Littleton office building on Saturdays, and then served parties. We lived in public housing, and we needed to live in public housing at the time. My father sent my mother to college when I was in the 8th grade. My father bought a house in the white part of town. We couldn't live there. The house was moved on the east side. My father lives in that house right now, today, this very day. All 3 of my sisters have college degrees, 1 a Ph.D. When I look back at how we got to where we are now, it was the help we received from the government. Living in public housing for 6 years until my father could save enough money to buy a home. There are tens of thousands of other stories just like that, where people needed a helping hand, received a helping hand, and now they use their time to extend that hand to help others. I yield back.
Reclaiming my time, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I rarely speak for everyone on a committee, but at risk of being challenged, I will speak for everyone on this committee. I think that everyone on this committee supports the notion that a good job and a good education is one of the best ways out of poverty. Now, I should speak for myself. What do we do about the people who are already in poverty today, who don't have the level of education that I would have them have, and don't have the employment that I would have them have? Solutions for tomorrow, I support. But there are needs of today that have to be met. Great soundbite, but it won't feed a stomach. Great soundbite, but it won't take you off the street. Great soundbite, but it doesn't give you help when you're living under a bridge. There's a right now problem that Mr. Cleaver seeks to address with a right now solution. I support education. If not but for education, I wouldn't be sitting in this seat. But education won't solve the hunger, the homelessness that Mr. Cleaver seeks to address for a good many Americans. I know it breaks your heart because it breaks my heart when I see a veteran holding up a sign, homeless, need help. And when I realize that we have spent $1 trillion plus to put them in harm's way, and when they return home, we have lengthy debates about how to assist them, when it is no secret that they need the basic necessities of life. If we can spend $1 trillion to put them in harm's way, we ought to be willing to spend what it takes to make sure they get good shelter, make sure they have access to great educations, and make sure they get good jobs. I support what Mr. Cleaver has offered, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman.